Welcome to Off the Page. I am Will Cain. I'm with Jim Geraghty. Jim, let's talk about some of these primary election races from earlier this week. I want to see if we can learn from them, see what what the voters might be telling us, and what we maybe should expect come the fall general midterm elections. So let's start with Nevada. Sharron Angle wins the GOP nomination to run against Harry Reid for the U.S. Senate. Now, Sharron Angle is the definitive Tea Party candidate. Is that right?
She is, and I had written a piece that was not terribly flattering a few weeks ago, and said that I, pointed out some of her odder comments and things that I thought would make for fairly easy and potentially very effective attack ads against her.
That was the anti-beer libertarian piece. Right?
Yeah, and it's, look, I'll, exponentially happier with Sharron Angle as a senator than Harry Reid. But, if your candidate has stuff in their past that, could lend themselves to ads with prisoners getting massages and spa treatments and perception that she doesn't like, she merely tolerates the legality of alcohol in Nevada, those are things that I think can be potentially problematic. Now, whether that's enough to outweigh the fact that Harry Reid is the point man for the Obama administration and that Nevada is, about one more economic problem away from being swallowed by the desert and disappearing forever. That remains to be seen. I think Harry Reid is still very vulnerable. But
now, Jim,
sure.
Is Sharron Angle simply unorthodox, simply radical, or is she really conservative? I mean, I've read that she is a far-right conservative. Is that accurate?
I think it's safe to say that while she was in the state legislature, which is probably the 2000, 2006 or so, she ran for a couple other offices in recent years. If she wasn't the most conservative lawmaker in Nevada, then she was certainly amongst the top 2, 3, 4. I mean, you probably could have found one or two others, but
right.
She represented a very conservative district outside of Reno, and her record was very conservative. There are a lot of cases in which the Democrats and Republicans in the state would manage to come together with some sort of compromise on lowering taxes or controlling spending that every other Republican in the state thought was okay and that she said violated her principles, and so she was the one. Now, sometimes when you get those holdouts, Tom Coburn holds out a lot in a lot of pieces of legislation in Congress.
Right.
Sometimes Ron Paul's one. So sometimes you love those types. And then sometimes you're like, okay, this is getting a little, grandstanding and not rejecting a perfectly good compromise for the sake of standing on ceremony, et cetera.
It takes us back to this debate we're having, Dement versus Cornyn.
And so I think it's safe to say it seems like every week, with each new primary, there's a new storyline of, the Tea Parties are really, really overhyped. The Tea Parties are this new powerful insurgent force that is overtaking the Republican Party. And I think we're kind of looking at this incorrectly. I think a good way of looking at it is that certain states are very ripe for a Tea Party movement, and certain states, for reasons of geography, for reasons of demographics, just aren't going to be easy territory for the Tea Parties. And I think we saw on Tuesday, there's no better classic distinction there than between Nevada and California.
Yeah, but I can feel you. Yeah, you're making the transition to California before we moved west from Nevada. Let me ask you this. Sharron Angle's positions, the influence of the Tea Party within Nevada, that's all great for a primary. Now she has to go win over those elusive, mysterious, confused independent voters, right? Can she do that? Can she win a general election?
I think so, because one of the things that I've been all year long Harry Reid reminds me a lot of John Corzine, the former governor of New Jersey. Pretty much since the beginning of 2009, heading into the election year, John Corzine was polling terribly, very similar to Harry Reid at that 39, 40, 41, 42, really topping up right around there. And those are very lousy numbers for an incumbent. And in both cases, it's a circumstance in which you're in office. You're a well-known figure. It's not like people don't know who you are or they're still making up their mind. They know who you are. And a majority of people decided they don't like you, they don't like the job you're doing.
But he's now Harry Reid's he's pretty happy to be running against Sharron Angle, isn't that right?
He is, and to a certain extent, this is he thinks that by demonizing her, by painting her as wildly out of the mainstream, that can save his butt and get him 50%, 51%, just enough to emerge, and it looks like a really tough year for him. It didn't work for John Corzine. He spent a ton of money. People said that in there every commercial break there was some attack ad demonizing Chris Christie, as he too is wildly out of the mainstream and far too right wing for New Jersey, and right wing for New Jersey. And that ended up being, being enough to narrow the gap from about 10, 11 points to about 4 or 5 points. And on election night, Chris Christie won by 4 points.
Well,
I wouldn't be stunned to see a similar scenario occur. On the other hand, I think in the end, Chris Christie ended up having some pretty good chops as a candidate. I am not yet convinced of that of Sharron Angle, but
that's what I'm asking. Yeah, right. If Harry Reid is John Corzine, can we only hope that Sharron Angle is Chris Christie?
She'll have to put on a few pounds.
Okay, let's complete our migration west then. Okay, so Meg Whitman wins the nomination to run for governor in California, and Carly Fiorina wins the nomination, the GOP nomination, to run against Barbara Boxer for U.S. Senate. Now, tell me, Jim, these two ladies are not Tea Party picks. Is that right? These are more moderate candidates?
Generally. I mean, it's kind of safe to say that Chuck DeVore was generally the more
right.
He was a very consistent conservative. Not terribly well-known state legislator, but he was the guy who you could say checked all the boxes. Whitman, Fiorina, they both come from the corporate America background, very successful businesswomen. Not your traditional, not what you traditionally associate with the Tea Parties. But one of the things I wanted to observe about this is that if you're a grassroots movement, and that means you've got a lot of fired up people and maybe some money, but not a ton of money, then Nevada's a state where it'll be very effective, because Nevada essentially is 2 big cities, Reno and Las Vegas, and then a whole lot of rural areas that don't have that many voters in there. So, you hit some with mailers, you do events in the other 2. Sharron Angle used to represent Reno, so you're pretty well situated. California, as everybody knows, is the most expensive state in the country to run campaigns in. It just has a ton of media markets. It's spread out all over the place. It's just impossible to do on the cheap. And so, you can have grassroots activists, and I know there were grassroots folks who were really fired up for Chuck DeVore, but, California politics have emerged to the point where you just need not just millions of dollars, but really tens of millions of dollars to run a campaign.
Is this the quality that's limiting the Tea Party's influence in money? Look, are we seeing the limits of the Tea Party's power in these big states? The Tea Party is having a lot of influence in smaller states like Nevada, but is money the divider? Is money the distinguisher on why the Tea Party might be hitting its limits of influence in bigger states like California?
I think it is, and I think it's worth noting that it's not that California is unique, but I think there's probably only a handful of states in which you would say money, makes the Tea Party really less effective than it could be. Probably my best example of how manpower can be effective in a way that money can't is in a House race that occurred in Pennsylvania last month. Paul Kanjorski is this incumbent Democrat who's been around forever and always has this thing of scandal around him. So there's a Tea Party member who always considers himself a Democrat, but was just fed up with Kanjorski and all that stuff. Decides to run, says, I'm not raising any money. I'm not spending any money. I'm just going to show up at candidate events and say what I feel and what I talk about. And that's all I'm going to do. Spending exactly $0. Guess what percentage of the vote he got in the primary, Will?
Tell me.
17%.
That's impressive.
The most cost-effective campaign in human history, I think. And then the following day, after he didn't win, he turned around and he endorsed the Republican Lou Barletta. And that kind of suggests that in this corner of northeastern Pennsylvania, 17% of Democrats are very receptive to a Tea Party message. And so it's one of those things where there are certain places in which you aren't going to need the money because the message itself will be powerful enough. Right. California isn't one of those places. I think it's safe to say running statewide in New York City probably isn't going to be enough. I think Florida would be kind of an interesting test case of that. It's another big state that's always been kind of representative of that. But I think generally, if your state has really big, expensive media markets, it's going to be a little tougher for your Tea Party candidates to get traction.
Well, I'd tie a ribbon on this by saying this. Meg Whitman, Carly Fiorina, Sharron Angle, I don't care how many pounds you put on. If you're brave enough to stand up to deficits and brave enough to stand up to teachers' unions, I and your states will be happy if you're Chris Christie.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks, Jim.
See you, Bill.